All
a
right,
good
sounds
group.
good. Yeah, sounds good. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I just wanted to point out a few things quickly before we get ourselves started, and I pass it over to Michelle and Delegate Charkoudian. I wanted to just share our events page and highlight a few things that are going on in the next week or two. First up, as you'll see on the page, is actually tomorrow morning. Our Sustainability Collaborative is having a meeting from 9:30 to 11. We'll be joined by Jennifer Kuntz with Clean Water Action and be talking about a state legislative wrap up. So that will be tomorrow. Next week, we have a Lunch and Learn gardening panel discussion on June 7th with representatives from Cheer and Charles Coiner Farm, as well as Montgomery Park's Community Garden Program, which will also be taking place on Zoom. And then in 2 weeks or so, on June 13th, we will have a SNAP Ambassador virtual training from 2 to 3 p.m. The virtual training will be done by our Food Council SNAP outreach team and will provide participants with knowledge and tools needed to help Montgomery County residents navigate their SNAP enrollment. And that registration can also be found on the events page on our website. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Michelle to get us started.
Thanks, everyone. Welcome. For those of you just joining us, I just admitted a bunch of people from the waiting room. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Jack will drop the agenda again for those that missed it in the chat from before. So I have the pleasure of introducing a close partner of ours, Delegate Lorig Charkoudian. So I'm going to read a quick bio and then turn it over to Delegate Charkoudian to share information about the 2023 legislative session and something that we're especially interested in and we know she's already working on, which is planning for 2024 and what that means for food system advocates on this call. So we're really thrilled for her to take the time to be here this afternoon and share her perspective with all of us. But I will begin by saying that Delegate Charkoudian was first elected to the Maryland House of Delegates in 2018. She took her years of community activism and legislative know-how and hit the ground running, as we all know. She has since worked on dozens of successful initiatives in Annapolis and within her district. She currently serves on the House Economic Matters Committee and chairs its Unemployment Insurance Subcommittee. She's also the co-chair of the Maryland Transit Caucus and a member of the Latino Legislative Caucus and the Women's Caucus. Her problem-solving approach and championing of larger policy issues remains grounded in a deep desire to improve people's lives by building a more just and inclusive world. Thank you so much again, Delegate Charkoudian, for sharing your time with us today.
Well, thank you. It's such a thrill to be here. I really appreciate it. And I'm grateful for the work of the Food Council and for everybody in the advocacy space and all of you for the work that you do both through the council as well as the work that you do in other settings. And I'm seeing folks here who I just saw on another call just about an hour and a half ago. So folks are working really hard for a more just and inclusive world. Michelle, can you share? Maybe I'll say a few words, but then I'm gonna want to share the screen pretty shortly.
Yeah, just let me know when.
Okay. So I think folks know that the legislative session is January to April. And so I'm going to talk in a few minutes about some of the larger pieces of legislation that we passed this year and how they fit into some ongoing efforts that we have. And then, as Michelle said, this is actually a really good time to be planning for the next legislative session that starts in 8 months. Generally, I spend the summer and fall really building coalitions and developing policy solutions, especially to some of the more complex or nuanced policy areas. One of the things that I try to do with all of my legislation is consistent with the way the Food Council works, which is really looking at policy areas as systems and really looking at the interconnection between a number of different aspects of how those systems interact, how those parts of the systems interact with each other, and then trying to develop comprehensive solutions whenever possible that get at all those pieces or come in with a couple different pieces of legislation that are touching on all of those different areas. So I will start by going through this slide and talking about some of the areas that we had success in, and then I will take questions. If you have questions while I'm talking, I don't mind. I'll sort of stop along the way and take questions as interested more of a dialogue, then I certainly don't feel like talking at you for half an hour. And then we can, I'd be interested in hearing what some of the issues are that you all are thinking about that could develop into legislation, state level legislation in particular, next year. So I think one of the ones that you're probably familiar with is Maryland Food System Resiliency Council. And what's exciting is that we've now made this a permanent thing at the state level. I'll mention that some of you may have been involved as long as 10, 15 years ago. There had been efforts in the past to really start a Food System Resiliency Council at the state level. And sadly, it took and those efforts didn't move forward. And it took the pandemic, as it seems to have taken the pandemic, to put issues front and center in front of people. It was the pandemic that let us say, look, the food system's broken. And we'd been saying that for years, of course, but the pandemic kind of made that clear to others. And we really need to look at it and address the food security emergency that's right in front of us in a way that is also building a more sustainable and resilient food system overall. And so that's what got us initially the bill, which we brought as an emergency bill 2 years ago. And that bill was put into MDEM, the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. And then in that bill, when we wrote it, we sort of created the space for that council to work for 2 years and then come back and report to the legislature about what, if it was needed more long-term, and if so, where it belonged and what the structure would be. And so this year, the bill that we passed, HB 32, made the Food System Resiliency Council permanent and kept it in the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, but with all of the various state agencies and grassroots organizations and community and county groups and food councils as members. So that bill passed. The council is now permanent, and I'm really excited for, as we move from a more emergency response focus to a sustainable structural focus. I'm really excited for what that will be able to do at the state level. I do always have to say, especially on these calls, I have to be careful when I'm elsewhere in the state, but the Montgomery County Food Council is really such an extraordinary model and one of the strongest in the state. And the Montgomery County Food Council really has played such a leadership role, both in passing the legislation at the state level and then also in the council itself and in supporting councils, across the state. And I guess Brittany is on here and is going to talk more about the council and what it's doing. So I'll stop there. Then I want to move on to categorical eligibility. And so we started with one bill and ended up breaking it into two. So I'm actually going to talk about House Bill 323 and House Bill 111 together because they really are a sort of part of this basic idea, which is that we have three different agencies and three different crucial safety net programs that look at almost identical information and make people go through application processes three different times. And so you have SNAP, which I think everyone here is familiar with. You have energy assistance, which helps low-income people pay energy bills, gas and electric. And then we have Medicaid, which of course is a medical insurance coverage. And so they have nearly identical, and part of what HB 323 did is it made it identical requirements in terms of income levels, household income levels, and yet we have people kind of jumping through hoops three times. So the way we set it up, because SNAP, in some ways, food is sort of the thing that people are need most often, right? And so the SNAP of those three safety net services is the thing that people are most likely to have. And so we sort of made it so that's the entrance. And once one is enrolled in SNAP, one automatically becomes enrolled in energy assistance unless one chooses to opt out, and automatically becomes enrolled in Medicaid unless one chooses to opt out. And so this is going to enroll something like 65,000 people into Medicaid automatically. It's going to assist with, you've probably heard about people ending up kind of being thrown off Medicaid. That during the pandemic, the re-enrollment was automatic. And so once that stopped being automatic, there's been a significant concern about people not knowing that and not completing the necessary applications. And so this makes people's lives simpler. It makes it more likely that people are going to be accessing the services and the safety net services that they are eligible for. And it also makes government more efficient, because what we have right now 3 different agencies and 3 different sets of employees looking at the exact same set of documents from the exact same family. And we can better use those funds to do a whole bunch of other things other than having the same people look at the same documents in 3 different agencies. So it seems really simple. It seems really obvious. Sometimes I have these bills that people are like, duh, did we really have to bring a bill for that? But apparently we did. And it was a little more of a lift than you might imagine, but I'm pretty excited about it. And all of this goes into effect later this year with Medicaid, and then beginning of next year with energy assistance. I am stopping and I'm scanning for questions. If people have questions, just stick your hand up. I'll stop between every few bills and take questions. I don't see any. Okay. And the last one, so the ones on the left side, by the way, are my bills. The ones on the right side are other important bills that are not mine, although the last one is. So maybe we didn't organize this as well as we thought. But so let's go to Chesapeake invasive species. So people are probably familiar with the work that we did a couple of years ago to establish basically a procurement requirement in Maryland so that state agencies are procuring locally grown food. It's a little more complicated than that. And if it's an issue people are interested in talking more about, I'm happy to talk more when we sort of move to Q&A. The basic idea is that the state agencies have a 20% requirement that they, as a goal, that they purchase from local farms. What we did this year was we added invasive species from the Chesapeake Bay to that mix of the 20%. And the idea behind it is that blue catfish in particular, although other invasive species like snakehead are wreaking havoc on our Chesapeake Bay and the tributaries in the bay itself. And we need to create incentives for those invasive species to be removed. And as it turns out, fortunately, blue catfish is very nutritious, and I'm told it's delicious, although I don't eat fish, but I'm told it's delicious. And so we sort of have this opportunity to provide a really high quality protein in prisons and schools and hospitals and other institutions, while at the same time removing the invasive species from the bay and creating economic opportunities for Maryland watermen. And so one of the things that we did this year is we expanded the local food procurement requirements for state institutions to include invasive species in the bay as part of that mix of what counts as local. Stopping there for a second to see if anybody has questions, and I don't see any. So I'm going to keep going. I don't know, are you able to do something to the top there? Because I can't quite see what it's thank you very much. So HB 502 is the Electronic Benefits Theft Act, and basically this created a pathway for people. I think probably everyone is familiar with the theft of people's SNAP benefits, which is just absolutely devastating for so many families in Maryland. And under the previous administration, we were sort of told there was nothing that could be done about it. This bill, and then in combination with and working with the new Department of Human Services leadership, creates a pathway for people to receive, to protect and then to receive funds back towards the SNAP benefits that were stolen off of their cards. Maryland Meals for Achievement. This bill increases the amount of funds for the breakfast program. There were a couple of bills that were designed to increase funding for both universal meals, breakfast and lunch. We didn't quite get all of what we had hoped for there. I think there's a lot more work to be done in terms of making school meals universally accessible. But this does increase some of the funding for the breakfast programs, and so that's a step in the right direction. Similarly, with the Hunger Free Campus Grant Program, increasing the funds for the Hunger Free Campus Grant Program. This one focuses on food insecurity on college campuses in the state. And finally, you might recall, and I think many of you worked on our bill last year that created a grant program for students, for student-led school-based compost programs. food waste reduction and compost programs. And when we created that last year, we it passed and the grant fund was created, but it did not have any funding tied to it. And so I'm happy to report that this year we worked on the budget itself and got $250,000 in the budget toward the grant program to reduce food waste and to compost food waste. And so what's really exciting about this, and if you worked on it, you might know that the students in across the state, but in particular some Montgomery County students who were leading this effort in the Coalition to Reimagine School Waste, managed to organize 10,000 postcards to go to the governor. We brought them to Annapolis and they met with the Secretary, MD Secretary McElwain, and they had a compost bin full of postcards. And the postcards came from students all over the state, and they were like, you know, students were writing about composting, and then you had like kindergartners with stick figure drawings of themselves like sorting their waste at the end of lunch. It was pretty awesome. And if you hadn't heard, the students, the Coalition to Reimagine School Waste, and the 4 or 5 students who were involved in it actually recently received the president's it's PEYA, it's President's Environmental Youth Advocacy. I don't remember the exact name of the award, but they just were recognized for Region 3, which is the EPA region that Maryland is in. So I'm really excited for getting these funds for this program, but I'm also excited for the recognition that those students who really led the effort are receiving from the President of the United States. So that's exciting. So I'm going to stop there. I will take questions about this, and then I also can talk about like some of the stuff we're looking at for next year. And if you want to close that out, I think that's probably fine. So let me start with any questions about this. Obviously, there were other bills, and there's bills that didn't pass. I didn't go. It's not an exhaustive list, but if there's a question, if there's a bill that you were tracking that I didn't mention that you want me to comment on, I can do my best to do that. Or if people have questions about the bills that did pass, I'll stop.
Thank you. As those on the call know, I have lots of questions, but I like to pause and give others a chance to go first. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. Okay, my question first. So Delegate Charkoudian, you mentioned too the 20% procurement goal for state agencies. Do you have an idea on how that program is going in terms of its implementation and what the barriers might be for reaching that 20% threshold?
Yeah, so thanks, because that actually gets into next year's legislation as well. If it's okay, I'm going to back up because I'm going to assume that not every single person on the call knows that whole issue and what we're doing with it, and so let me back up to the structure and what it is that we have created and sort of how we're moving towards it. And it is a sort of iterative process that we expect to be working on legislatively for a number of years. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to increase the amount of local food that is served in Maryland institutions. And so that's prisons, it's hospitals, it's universities, to some extent it's schools, although schools are not exactly under the state procurement rules. But if we create the state procurement rules right, then we have the ability to support the schools to get access to the same buying. The problem that we have, and I think it probably goes without saying, but I'll mention that that's important both to create markets for small Maryland farmers. It's important to shorten the supply chain, and it's important also because the people eating in those institutions tend to be the most vulnerable, tend to be lower income, tend to be folks who have access to the least healthy food. And so it's especially important to make sure that healthy, fresh, local food is getting into all those institutions. And so the challenge in institutional procurement is that generally our institutions buy through prime contractors, and those prime contractors like Aramark, for example, who has a lot of prison contracts, will generally purchase through then like a Cisco who has a national supply chain, and it's very difficult for small Maryland farmers to be in the Cisco supply chain. And so we have had for years all kinds of goals about we want to buy local, but two things have happened. One is generally the supply chain as it's structured and the way that the larger prime contractors do their buying does not allow for Maryland farmers to be able to get in. But the second thing, and so the first thing that we had to do was we had to sort of break that down. And so what we did is we actually put into state law that any prime contractor, so Aramark is filing their responding to an RFP, they have to demonstrate that they have attempted to get 20% from local farms. And in that demonstration, they actually have to show who they tried to contract with. So that means they may end up, and for the foreseeable future, they probably won't hit that 20%. But what it does is it forces a conversation to happen that was not forced to happen before, and that just didn't happen before. So the first thing it does is it forces that conversation. But the second thing that it does is it starts to give us data. When they put in their reports on, we tried to get 20%, we got 2%. Here's the 50 farms we spoke to. The reason that we couldn't procure from them was because of quantity, because of quality, because of gap certification, because of whatever the issues are. Processing, they didn't process it the way that our prisons need to process. So as we start to get that information, that is what is going to let us do the next step of legislating, because we'll know what it is that is keeping people from being able to hit that 20%. The second issue that we found was that a lot of schools in particular, or other institutions that had buy local programs, were doing all their buy local from Pennsylvania, from North Carolina, and Maryland farmers weren't kind of getting into that mix. And the reason for that is that it's a whole host of complicated things, but a lot of it is price. And so where we find ourselves is that Maryland has the highest nutrient management standards of anyone anywhere in the country, really, but in terms of protecting the Bay. And so we have asked our farmers to internalize the cost of the impact that they have on the Bay. But the sort of shameful reality is that our institutions, like our state policy is internalize that cost. And I 100% believe that we should have those nutrient management standards, but we've asked our farmers to internalize the cost, and then our state agencies say, but that's too expensive, so I'm going to buy from North Carolina. And so, but because of the interstate commerce clause, we can't say our institutions are going to buy from Maryland farms. And so what we have to say instead is our institutions, and this is what we ultimately passed, our institutions are going to buy from farms who farm consistent with Maryland nutrient management standards. And so what that means is every Maryland farm is automatically in, because they have to comply with the nutrient management standards. And any Pennsylvania farm that wants to voluntarily participate in the nutrient management standard, or North Carolina or Virginia or anywhere else, then is also in. And so what it does is it takes our environmental values and incorporates that into our food procurement, which has never been done before we passed that bill. So that was the second thing that was very important that we did. And then the third thing that we did in that same legislation, this is it was in 2021. The third thing that we did in that legislation is that we set up funding for aggregation and distribution infrastructure. And so the issue a lot of times is that, a Sysco isn't going to buy from 50 different local farms, but could purchase from 50 farms aggregated, and the lettuce is chopped up and bagged. And so we're working on getting more of those aggregation and distribution facilities through the funding that we put into this bill. That bill passed in 2020. Governor Hogan vetoed it. We overrode the veto in 2021. And so we are just getting to the place where we're starting to get the data, because it took a while to set up the program, to sign on all of the farmers to become certified local farm enterprises. And the conversations are starting to happen. So right now we have anecdotal data about University of Maryland procuring eggs from this, that, or the other farm. We have anecdotal data about a prison purchasing produce, but we're waiting for the formalized reporting data, and we expect that we'll have that in the next few months. And once we have that, we're going to be able to determine what it is exactly that we're going to be coming in with as legislation next year to further refine the process.
Thank you for going into that detail. I think it's a really impressive iteration of steps that will help to solve this problem that's been intractable for the last 50 or so years in our food system. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just say it's one of those things that, I think many of you have been in the conversation for a while. You have this sort of circular conversation. Everyone's like, yeah, we need to buy more local. And then people are like, yeah, but this, yeah, but that, yeah, but this. And so what we said was, well, let's just start doing it. Let's start in some direction. And as we start and require things, then we'll start to get more information. And so we're going in eyes wide open that this hasn't solved everything. But if we don't start doing something, then we never figure out what else it is that we have to do. And so that's really kind of the approach we ended up taking on this.
And I have follow-up questions, but I want to turn to the chat where two folks, Allison and Patricia, have asked about the categorical eligibility bills. One question about when they take effect and how that is being communicated, especially to people who don't have English as their first language.
Yeah, so the SNAP Medicaid should take effect in October, and energy assistance should take effect in January. And the details of how it gets implemented and how it gets communicated actually is going to be up to the agencies. So each of those agencies should have systems in place already for communication across multiple languages. What specifically it's going to look like, when someone is signing up for SNAP, becomes eligible, then is told, you're eligible and all but enrolled in home energy assistance. Now we just need your PEPCO account number, right? I mean, you need some account number, you need something. So there is still that step. So there'll need to be some communication. The bill just doesn't start getting paid, by itself. But the enrollment, if anyone is familiar with energy assistance applications now, it's absolutely it's inhumane what it is that you have to go through to get energy assistance. So this is going to be huge on that front, but there's still going to have to be some communication there. And so because the agencies are required to communicate in multiple languages, I assume they'll come up with a way to do this as well, but I don't know what that is because it's an agency level decision.
Thank you. Any other questions before I continue asking my questions? Oh, I see one from Carol Jones in the chat. Carol, do you want to come off mute and speak? Or do you want me to read your question?
Sorry, I'm on what happened to mine? Okay, there we go.
Yeah, hey.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say, Delegate Charkoudian, how excited we are that the diversion mandate, which has been a topic of conversation for a number of years, has now, that you sponsored, was put into effect, and now the large generators are required to divert their food scraps. So looking to a next policy goal in terms of food scraps, we studied this issue in the Environmental Impact Working Group of the Food Council last year, and noted that a number of states and cities have actually put in place food waste reduction requirements, which bring in not only the recycling, but the higher impact activities in terms of prevention, as well as recovery as specific goals. So we were really thinking in terms of the county level, but since we're having a conversation with you, I thought I would ask the question, do you see a pathway, toward such a policy goal at the state level, starting with a study, which was obviously where the diversion mandate started from?
Yeah, thank you. Well, let me just first say that right now, what went into effect in January is the mandate for diversion for generators who generate more than 2 tons per week. What will happen next January is it'll broaden to include those that generate 1 ton per week. My thinking of the next steps is that where I thought I would go with that next year or the year after is actually looking to go down to 1/2 ton or 1/4 ton, which is what my bill originally did. It included 1/2 and 1/4, and then that sort of got compromised out in order to pass the bill. So I had been thinking of going in that direction or including restaurants. Restaurants had gotten out of the bill. You might recall that, well, the restaurant lobby is very influential in Annapolis, but also it was right after COVID, this is 2021 that we passed the bill. And so everyone was like, let's not do anything that makes it harder to be a restaurant. And so, so I think that's where I was thinking about taking it, but I'm open to taking it in other directions, and I would welcome the chance to learn more about this. I will say someone raised an interesting question to me. One of the organizations in the area that does food rescue receives the donations and distributes them, was asking me about if we had any enforcement on the quality of the donations, that they often receive stuff that's in such poor shape that they can't, it becomes more of a burden, right? They get the boxes and, 3/4 of what's in there has to be composted. And so I think as there's an element to think about in terms of, especially if we're saying, rescue first, which we are, right? Like use first, eat first, before we compost. At some point, we may need to do something that makes sure that those who are receiving the rescued food aren't receiving things that they can't use, that then sort of makes their job harder. So, we only have a few more minutes for me now, but Carol, I would welcome the chance. I'd love to see what it is you've got. If you've got the report that you put together, I absolutely would consider it in the state context.
Yeah,
Great.
we're happy.
We will
to
share
work.
that. Thank you.
Yeah, we're happy to work with our EIWG folks on getting you that information. So thank you. Thanks, Carol, for bringing up that great question. I see a question in the chat, and then I also welcome Delegate Charkoudian to share any other bills related to the food system that she's focused on for 2024 and how advocates can support her in those efforts. But the categorical eligibility question in the chat is about impact on beneficiaries in the coming year. So it says, sorry, you see it? Okay.
I do see it. I'm not sure that I understand it though. So Patricia, if you want to, you're saying like, do they actually do it? Is that what in terms of accountability?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what kind of oversight will be exercised in terms of how well the agencies are implementing this and its impact on beneficiaries. Is there something in the law already to look at that, or is that, I'm just wondering if there's a gap in the law in terms of the accountability on this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's always this challenge, as we learned in the previous administration, in terms of accountability and implementation of the laws that we passed. We would pass laws. I'm the chair of the unemployment insurance subcommittee, which you might have heard was a total train wreck in not my subcommittee, but the unemployment insurance system. But we would pass these laws about customer service, about what they had to do, and they just kind of didn't do them. And so there is a real problem in the, you can't, we have accountability and we have oversight, some oversight ability, but ultimately, in terms of implementation, like you need to have good leadership within the agency. I'm optimistic. Actually, let me say I'm very optimistic actually about the agency heads right this second. But I appreciate the question because I think it is something that we need to stay on top of. Because obviously, if we can pass all the best laws in the world, if the agencies aren't implementing them, then they're not helpful. So I expect that we'll have some reports on it next year, and then we'll be in a position in 2025 to adjust things if the reports that come back from the implementation aren't what we intended.
Great. Well, I'd appreciate your leadership and really taking a look at, how well is that being implemented, and, what ultimately are the impacts on beneficiaries, because I know from supporting families that, navigating those systems is just horrendous, particularly if you don't have English language skills.
Yeah, it is. And if you haven't had a chance to sort of see the new Department of Human Services Secretary Lopez in action, I've been meeting with him since he was appointed, and been having these conversations with him. And I think he is well aware of just my conversation I had with him just 2 weeks ago of really how poorly the agency he now runs has implemented everything that it is responsible for the last very long time. I don't know when it started. I've only been in office for 5 years myself. But I think he's aware of it and working on it. And so I think it'll be a combination of the, oversight that the legislature is able to provide, but I also feel like he's working on getting it to head in the right direction.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And Delegate Charkoudian, I see we have an additional question, a raised hand. Do you have a minute to go a little bit over time? Is that okay with you?
Oh,
Okay,
absolutely.
great. Anne Marie, go ahead.
Thanks so much. And I apologize because it's more a statement and an offer than a question, but just to follow up on Carol's mentioning of the food divergent, rule and scraps. we're obviously too happy, to provide you with feedback from the food security community in terms of what they see moving forward in the future, in terms of donations that they start receiving, because what we really want to make sure is that our food assistance providers, who are also serving some of our most vulnerable residents, are not kind of being bombarded with low nutritional quality foods, as a result of these laws. And obviously what we'd all rather see is that they just reduce, in production and bringing into warehouses, and not that we're all taking it on the other side.
Absolutely. Yes, well, so stay in touch. So I just say, I ended up sort of answering the question about what I'm doing next legislative session, sort of in this conversation. So I really it is carrying forward right now. The two things that I am looking at bringing in as it relates to food is sort of carrying forward the work that we've been doing on the procurement, the stuff that we've just been talking about. It's not clear to me so we know that we'll have to adjust the procurement requirements for state agencies in some way, right? There's going to be something there once we see that report. There may be some additional work to be done in this question about the distribution, the aggregation, distribution, and processing that's necessary. It's not clear if that will be adjusted this year, or if we'll be adjusting the procurement policies, and then maybe we'll do more on the aggregation the following year. There is still a considerable amount of money that's available for that, and in some ways it's not clear if we need more money, or if we need to do something different in terms of on the ground in the counties. I think some of you may know I've been trying to get Montgomery County to take the money that is available and additional money that I got in bond bill money, and actually put together an aggregation facility, aggregation processing distribution facility that could sort of support this region. So we're working on that. So I'm just saying, I'm not sure if that's going to show up as legislation or just in really this continued conversation about how do we kind of take that next step with it. And then the second area that I'm really looking at is the carrying on the food waste issue. And I think specifically looking at expanding, bringing in the half-ton and/or restaurants. And if, so that's where I'm because there'll probably be a bill in that kind of general bucket, compost bucket. If anyone wants to, thank you. If anyone wants to, I'm happy to kind of consider this other piece that you're sharing. And if you have examples of state legislation that prioritize the food rescue for eating, if you've seen language actually in state law, I'd love to take a look at that and see if kind of this is the right time to add that to the mix.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Delegate Charkoudian. And just quickly, before you go, any words of wisdom for folks that might be on the call that are new to advocacy at the state level, how to engage with you or other delegates or senators, and when's the right time to do that advocacy?
Oh, sure. Well, first, welcome, because we can never have enough. And I think if you are interested in actually like driving a particular policy, the shape of the policy, now is a really good time to be talking to people. When people come to me in November with an idea, there's not a lot I can do with it, just because, unless it's a really, really simple idea. But if it's a complex idea that's going to take some research and development and looking at what other states are doing, like this is the time to be having those conversations so that we have time to sort through all those things. Reach out to all the stakeholders, those kinds of things. But if you want to weigh in on a policy that is in front of us, then any day is a good day. January is fine to start reaching out to your representatives and let them know what matters to you. But I would say even I think it's worth just if you're brand new to this, it's worth going to places that your representatives are, and just letting them know that these are issues you care about. So like, it's helpful for me to hear, obviously food systems is something I've worked on for years before I was ever elected. And no matter what anyone says to me, I'm going to keep working on it. But there's other things that are not necessarily my areas of expertise. And so it's helpful when, people see me at the farmer's market and say, oh, hey, you're my rep, and I just want you to know that I really care about fire safety issues, and here's the concerns that I have, right? And so it's important that you're just, if this is something that you feel passionate about, go to the political events, track them down at the, farmers market, YMCA. We're pretty much like fair game anywhere we go. And so, side of the soccer field, and just like share, these are things that are important to me, even if it's not a specific policy that you're prepared to advocate for or talk about, because it's just really helpful to kind of have that conversation. I think about democracy as an ongoing conversation. And so you just think about yourself as part of that, and like welcome to be in that ongoing conversation, sometimes in very specific ways around a specific policy, and sometimes in much more general ways, just sharing our values with each other.
Well, thank you again so much for joining us and taking time out of your schedule to share what happened in 2023 and how we can prepare for 2024. We really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and if I can't wait till Zoom has sound effects and we could all applaud you. But for now, just the visual effects. So thank you again. And we're going to turn it over to someone that Delegate Charkoudian referenced earlier, who is incredibly important within state policy. Brittany Cook is with the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council. And Brittany shared with us before the call that she is operating on limited bandwidth. So I'm not sure if she's going to come off video or not, but I do have her slides to share. So Brittany, just let me know when you are ready and I can cue this up for you.
Yeah, can you hear me first of all? Perfect. So sorry. You travel and you think you plan and it just doesn't work out sometimes, but I'm ready when you are. And I see that we are running. Is time okay, or should I can give the super abbreviated version, since Delegate Charkoudian really kind of queued me up already for the most part?
No, we're good on time. Jack and I build a 10-minute buffer into every meeting with the hope that our elected officials want to go over time and answer additional questions. So we are good. You have a full, 15 or so minutes, and then a couple questions at the end. And for folks that have updates to share, which was the very end of our meeting, member updates, feel free to send those directly to myself or Jack, or share them in the chat and we'll include them in the notes. So Brittany, feel free to let me know when you need me to advance the slides.
Perfect, thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Brittany Cook. I am the Executive Associate for Secretary Strickland for the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, and still acting Food Resiliency Specialist to staff the council, the Food System Resiliency Council. I am, at Michelle's request, gonna just go through a brief kind of like synopsis of the council, some structural things with the council, and then a little bit of what they did for session this year, and looking forward to next year, citing a couple of ideas that might be out there. You can go to the next slide. So again, like Delegate Charkoudian referenced, House Bill 831 and Senate Bill 723 established the Food System Resiliency Council. The council is a multi-agency collaborative effort that engages food system experts on issues of resilience in the state of Maryland. It went into effect in June 2021. And so we are just about hitting our, I believe, 2-year mark now, still working some things out, but we're still infants in the food council world, and so still working out some things, and you'll see that and later on when I talk about the bill. Next slide. So the council was put in MDEM specifically because, one, we are planners. We plan for disaster, recovery, mitigation, preparedness, and we are the statewide coordinating agents. So we have a lot of different expertise amongst different fields of the system, period. We have health, food, in addition to the emergency management component. And we are a neutral party, so we don't take a particular perspective, which made it really as a complement for the council, bringing a whole bunch of different stakeholders together. You want to make sure that you have a neutral party to kind of keep things in line and to help point the arrows back to our goals. Next slide. So right now the council is still structured in the same way as it was first established. We have co-chairs, and so Secretary Strickland and Director Heather Bruskin, now newly Director Heather Bruskin, is our co-chairs for the council. And then we have vice co-chairs from representative from the Department of Ag, Human Services, and also from University of Maryland. Next slide. Our membership, in terms of our appointed members, we have about 32 now appointed members. They are from all walks of life in the food system. We have multiple state agencies, food council members, University of Maryland. We would like more farmers. I believe we still have one farmer as a representative, nonprofits, food advocacy and food policy experts. So we try to make sure that we're reaching across a broad spectrum. And I believe that's how it was written in our statute as well, when the council was established, but we are still adding to the roster as well. Next slide. In terms of the council's working group, we are subject to Open Meetings Act. So all of our meetings are open to the public. You're welcome to join at any point in time. But real engagement with people of the public who are not appointed members, other nonprofits and food system experts are done at the committee or the subcommittee level. So we have 3 different subcommittees. Communication coordination, they typically handle our ledge stuff and anything related to like structural considerations for the council. Environment and production is pretty self-explanatory as to what they cover: ag and farming and regenerative agriculture, composting, food diversion. Those types of conversations are held there. And then distribution and access, which really drives into the distribution and access related to things like SNAP, TFAP, the commodities program, and other considerations out in that level. So if for those who want to have a voice and are looking to engage with other state agencies, we have senators, delegates, this is a great place for you to come and actually have a dialogue with those people, and it's welcome. That's one of the hubs and one of the goals in which the council was formed in the first place. And I'll go over scheduling, and so you're able to, if you want to engage, I'll give you that information as well. Next slide. So like I said before, the council is established per statute, but in that statute, there's also 4 goals that are the driving mission of the council. So all of our reports, any events or actions or products that the council produces are all based off of meeting these 4 goals and addressing food insecurity, the food insecurity crisis at the state level as a result from the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting economic crisis therein. Looking at equitable and sustainable policy recommendations that really relates back to our report and back to the subcommittees. Those are really the deliverables or the products that the council produces that can be tangibly seen. Expanding the impact of existing food council organizations. Like last year, we did a recommendation that there should be regional food councils, and made that recommendation part of our annual report to the legislator. And then like developing a strategic plan to increase production and procurement of Maryland certified foods. So again, all back to the working groups and looking at and having that dialogue with different stakeholders within Maryland, right? So next slide. relating back to the on the committee level, communication and coordination committee is our basically our ledge committee. This year we did it slightly different in terms of how we wanted to go about reviewing bills, supporting bills, lobbying, things of that nature. So the first step that we worked with is just doing a little bit of discovery, related to all the bills that were proposed. So it was me and Anna, who was the other staff from senior staff from MDEM, to review all of the proposed bills for this session, which there were a lot. So that was waking up in the morning, 5 o'clock, looking at the list, pulling out items that may be of consideration for the committee. We worked with CHHS, who are contractors. They helped prepare bill presentations for any proposed bills that we thought may be of interest or pertinent to the committee. The committee then went ahead and discussed bills, whether or not there is a point, or is it effective to take a position, provide either written or verbal testimony. The committee did vote on each one of the items so that it was a joint effort and all voices were heard. And then, of course, execution of legislation action. So like lobbying, providing that verbal testimony or written testimony. And we created like a document. CHHS was really good. Our contractors were great in creating a legislative tracker. And go next slide. And so that's very small, but I will put in the chat the link to our legislative tracker. It's color coded, so I believe the greens are the ones that obviously passed, red they didn't go through, and I think we took no position on the ones that remain kind of white or non-colored. So the legislative tracker does look a little different this year. We did it last year as well, but I will put that in the chat for those of you who are interested in a deeper dive related to specific bills that you may have interest in or want to see more of. Next slide. So like I said before, that's the link to the tracker, but I will put that in the chat for those to just go ahead and cut and paste and click. We ended up supporting 31 bills this year, and that includes cross-filed bills as well. And so when everyone is ready, or you want to, again, refer back to the tracker, there are a couple of bills that I just wanted to point out because they were talked about in our May 23rd meeting. In the next slide. One, Delegate Charkoudian already referenced to was the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council bill. We did provide that appointed members provided verbal testimony for this bill. It did pass, which was great. A couple of notable things that happened as a result of this bill is that now, like Delegate Charkoudian said, the Food System Resiliency Council is no longer an independent entity, but part of Maryland Department of Emergency Management, which opens up a couple more doors in terms of resources and support for the council itself. This bill also helped in terms of the co-chair, how the co-chair processing or election is held. Historically, the co-chair could only be our secretary from the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, and then a food council representative. And so that language has now been changed so that all appointed members have the opportunity to run for co-chair or be elected for co-chair, which will help us out a lot in terms of finding replacement, because it's a lot. The council, a lot. There's a lot to do. So we're excited to see that. Another thing to know is that it puts the council in the Office of Resilience. That bill passed the previous session. It is a newly formed part of our department. And so we're really excited to see one, how the build out and how that part of the office will be stand up, and then seeing how the council fits into that. So we'll look out for those developments as things happen. Next slide. Two other things in terms of looking forward at the next session. is we had a legislative debrief on May 23rd with the full council it was a hybrid meeting that we had. It is recorded and it will be on our website. So I will put that in the chat as well. If anyone wants to take a look at the meeting that we had on May 23rd. But two things of note, and there were a lot because there's 31 bills, but two things of note is one, House Bill 502, Senate Bill 2, which is the electronic benefit transfer card, effective benefits. Secretary Lopez, the Secretary of DHS, was able to attend that meeting, and he provided a really nice update to where we are as of right now. And so over 9,000 benefits have been restored as of right now, and that they will be looking to advocate for more federal assistance or federal help. And then in early July, they'll expand the reimbursement out to those who've lost benefits as of January 1st, 2021. So it expanded what's already been accomplished, which is really good. And so we look forward to having more conversations with Secretary Lopez and DHS in relation to this particular topic. And that would be more in the Distribution and Access Committee. If anyone's interested in listening in or providing perspective, we certainly welcome you in that committee. Another one is more on the ag side with the on-farm composting. I know it's a really hot button item right now in discussion. Notably because language was changed within this bill in terms of the square footage from 40,000 to 10,000, making this bill kind of ineffective for composting in a more meaningful way. So that discussion will be something that's of interest for several of our committee members in environment and production. And so if anyone's interested or has more perspective on that, we do welcome you to come to environment and production for further discussion and to offer your perspective, because it's definitely needed and we appreciate it. So next slide. So just in terms of like scheduling for those who are interested, the FSRC has full council meetings bi-monthly. So we just had one in May, June, so our next one will be in July. It will be posted on our website. Again, I'll put all these links in the chat after I'm finished talking. And our committee meetings are either bi-weekly or monthly. Our next environment and production committee meeting is next week on Thursday. And then distribution access will meet next month. So they meet monthly. There's also opportunity if you would like to provide information to appointed members in a more facilitated dialogue, presentation, and then discussion. We have lunch and learn sessions that are scheduled either monthly, and those are interchangeable in between. We have in-person regional tours. So our last one was in Prince George's County, which was really great. That was on April 19th. And the next one is going to be in Caroline County. Going to see a lot of different things that are going on locally, give some of the secretaries and other agencies an opportunity to see what's being done locally and speak with people who are actually doing the actual work, boots on the ground efforts throughout the state. So they had a really good dialogue at our first one, and we look forward to Caroline County tour, and that's on the 26th of June. I will put the RSVP link in the chat as well for those who are interested in joining us. I just need a head count. So other than that, I think that was my last slide, Michelle. Yeah. So if you have questions for me, you're welcome, or you can email me or call my number. I do answer my phone.
It's always good when people answer the phone these days. Thank you so much, Brittany. This was incredibly informative. I do want to acknowledge that we are at time for folks that need to hop off. We will share all the links that Brittany mentioned in the notes, as well as a recording if folks have to hop off and miss the last minute of conversation. But for folks that want to stay on for a minute, does anyone have a quick question for Brittany? Hearing none, Brittany, but I really just want to emphasize for folks on the call that, you know, there are ways to get involved at the state level food council that is really making some robust recommendations to the state government that the state government appears to be paying attention to. And so I think this is a really great opportunity for expertise from the folks on this call to really engage and get involved in making change at that state level that then trickles down to Montgomery County, as we all know. So thank you again, Brittany. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks for hanging on for an extra minute, and we will absolutely share these links out as well as the recording when we share out the notes. So bye, and thank you again, everyone.